some of the most haunted places in New York. So, without further ado, let's get spooky. So, number one on my list here is the House of Death in Greenwich Village. The address of 14 West 10th Street is home to a revitalist Greek brownstone in one of the most charming neighborhoods in New York City. Who else, thinks about what we do in the shadows when they hear New York City? It's a perfectly normal-looking red brick apartment building, but has a seriously destructive history. The home is said to be haunted by at least 22 ghosts, including Mark Twain. The famous writer didn't die in the house, but over 20 other people did, and some of them were not natural deaths. Perhaps Mark decided to haunt the home because he knew he wouldn't be alone. From 1900 to 1901, Twain lived in the house, and he reported several strange paranormal incidents during his stay. Aside from Twain roaming the halls, visitors claimed to see Lisa Steinberg, the 6-year-old girl who was brutally murdered by her adopted father in 1987. The staircase is the most haunted part of the house. Lisa often runs up and down it. Twain is seen trudging up them, and many guests have reported the sound of marching all throughout the house. The home was also inhabited by a psychic medium who wrote a book called Spindrift, detailing her horrifying experiences of the property. This place sounds very interesting. Also, speaking of psychic mediums, I actually went to one. As I'm recording this, I went to one last night, and it was very interesting. Let me tell you that. Next up, Guernsey Hollow Cemetery, Frewsburg. Cemeteries, in general, have a creepy ambience. However, some of these resting places seem to have an abundance of above-ground residents. With its remote location down a rarely used dirt road, toppled 19th century gravestones, and lore of some gruesome murder, Guernsey Hollow Cemetery is steeped in frightful rumours. There are many children buried in this cemetery, but the most famous is a young mentally disabled 7-year-old. The unfortunate citizen of early Frewsburg was chased into the cemetery by a mob of townspeople for unknown reasons. She was stoned on the grounds and then buried there. Visitors to the cemetery sometimes see the girl and a lady in white who is said to protect her. The cemetery is often used by teens for spooky Friday night gatherings and has been abused with graffiti. Gravestones have also been tipped over. Local legend states that the spirits here are angry about the treatment and are often menacing to nighttime visitors. Ooh, a graveyard at night is not my vibe, to be honest with you. Number 3, White Horse Tavern, Greenwich Village. Also located in lovely Greenwich Village, White Horse Tavern has stood its ground since 1880. The tavern is famous as the favoured drinking ground of Dylan Thomas. Thomas, the author of Do Not Go Gentle into the Good Night, was a Welsh poet and writer with a taste of whiskey. One night in 1953, Thomas outdrank everyone else in the bar, so he decided to compete against himself. After shooting 18 whiskies, Thomas reportedly passed out. He was moved to the Hotel Chelsea, but he did not recover. Friends admitted him to St. Vincent's Hospital, but it was too late. The poet had already been taken to the afterlife by his favourite golden liquor. Today, visitors often claim to see Dylan Thomas at his corner table successful book and movie franchise based very loosely on the legends from the home. Whether the movie was embellished or not, the real-life stories emanating from the home are tough enough to swallow. In 1974, the house witnessed its most gruesome event. Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed he was motivated by voices living in the home to kill his family. Unfortunately, DeFeo listened and killed 6 members as they slept. Following the murders, the Lutz family moved into the property. They only made it to 28 days in the house. They suffered from ominous dreams, strange smells, and a deep sense of discomfort in the home, or so they said. There was much debate and a plethora of lawsuits between the Lutz family and multiple media organizations who claimed their stories are told in the books were untrue. The house is now a private property, and the address has been changed from 112 to 108 to try to curb the unwanted tourists. Yeah, I've heard a lot of things about this, like whether it really happened and all that. And apparently there aren't even any reports of any paranormal activity from anyone after the Lutz, so it's very strange. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but who knows. Morris Jamel Mansion, Manhattan. The Morris Jamel Mansion has been standing its ground since 1765. The giant Georgian was built by Robert Morris and was used as a military headquarters for George Washington during the Revolutionary War. The home was then purchased in 1810 by Stephen and Eliza Jamel. Stephen perished under somewhat suspicious circumstances. While some say he died of pneumonia, others state that he fell from a wagon. The doctor treated his wounds, but Eliza is said to have removed the bandages and allowed him to bleed to death. Others say he fell on a pitchfork or was buried alive. Eliza reportedly tricked her longtime lover into marrying her in the first place, though his status was much greater than hers, by telling him that she had a fatal disease. The couple lived between Paris and New York, and a few years before his death, she is said to have come home to Washington Heights without her husband, using a power of attorney to take hold of his fortune. She married ex-vice president and famous jeweler Aaron Burr shortly after her husband died. Unfortunately, Burr reportedly used her fortune to pay off his own debts, and she promptly divorced him. Ooh, is that karma? Eliza later died from Alzheimer's and is said to haunt the house. She doesn't like loud talking or rowdy children who visit her home museum. Other guests report sightings of former soldiers, enslaved people, and even Aaron Burr. Multiple seances and paranormal investigators have reported evidence of poltergeists in the house. Luckily for dark tourists, it's easy to visit the house on one of their paranormal historical tours. Well, that was very interesting, I do have to say. I don't know if I've ever heard about that. But if she used that guy, she definitely got her karma come for her big time. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, Sleepy Hollow. You undoubtedly recognize this name as the home of the spindly schoolmaster Ichabod Crane and his nemesis, the Headless Horseman. In Washington Irving's classic story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the writer explores a mix of local law and European folk stories. The area surrounding the Bronx River was important in the Revolutionary War, and a legend to the headless corpse of a Hessian soldier is thought to be at the center of Sleepy Hollow's famous story. The cemetery in the town is both stunning and creepy. It's also home to several famous graves, including that of as many as 15,000 people may have been massacred and scalped in the attack. Others were taken to Canada as hostages. Visitors to the fort today report seeing multiple shadowy figures. Some of them are quite authoritative, forcing guests to keep moving quickly through the ranks. Oh, very interesting. The Dakota, Upper West Side. The day John Lennon was shot was the end of an era for the Beatles lovers all over the world. John had long since moved to a solo career, gathering a whole new generation of fans with his innovative rhythms and thought-provoking songwriting. One of these fans loved John a little too much. Mark David Chapman stalked the famous artist before taking his life in the front of the Dakota apartment building in 1980. John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono had lived together in the luxury apartment complex since 1973. Yoko continued to live in the Dakota for 50 years before moving to their home in the Catskills. She states that she had seen the ghost of her husband sitting at the white grand piano. Even before John's spirit haunted the lobby, the couple reported seeing a crying lady in the building. Other guests report seeing the ghost of a small girl and a very sinister ghost of a man with the countenance of a child. The Dakota was also filming location of Rosemary's Baby, which has to be one of the creepiest American horror movies ever. Yeah, I've definitely heard of this, and you know what, I've actually never watched Rosemary's Baby. I love horror movies, I know what it is, I know what the story is, but I've just never watched it. Number 10. Utica State Hospital, Utica. Founded in 1843, Utica State Hospital was the first government-run facility for the mentally ill in New York. It was a high-tech facility, but like most treatments for mental illness in the 19th century, the medical care given was harsh and gruesome. Patients routinely received lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and extreme confinement. In fact, the facility is famous for the invention of the Utica crib. This horrible feat of engineering was a long, skinny cage that agitated patients were placed in like animals. Though the halls were cleared of live patients decades ago, they're still teeming with action. Locals report ghostly faces peering out of the windows, footsteps in the halls, and screaming from inconsolable patients. The hospital has been abandoned for some time, but it does allow for scheduled and organized paranormal investigations. If you're visiting upstate New York on the hunt for ghouls, make sure you take at least a drive by St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, New Amsterdam. Churches are supposed to be the places of peace and spiritual restoration. However, where there's a one-legged Dutch poltergeist hanging out behind the altar, that tends to disturb the sanctity a bit. Supposedly, the church was built over the burial site of the former regional leader Peter Stuyvesant. Stuyvesant. Why am I saying it all French? That's probably not even French. Stuyvesant. That's where I'm going with. In 1651, Peter purchased the land from the Dutch West India Company to build a bowery, which included a family chapel, under which he was later interred. The church was later built over the chapel. Today, visitors to the church claim that a disembodied voice often sings hymns in Dutch. The church bells ring on its own, and they sometimes hear the sound of a peg leg clanking against the floors. It's claimed to be the oldest continually used religious site in New York City, so ghost stories abound far beyond the Dutchman. If you want to meet some of these historical spectres for yourself, take a tour of the St. Mark's and its accompanying cemetery. Oh, that's very interesting. Washington Square Park, Greenwich Village. I have noticed a theme here of you guys as a few in Greenwich Village. Originally a potter's field, Washington Square Park was turned into a public square in 1825. As in most cases where we build public spaces over burial grounds, the interred spirits are a bit upset. sightings of shadowy figures in the asylum burial ground. Yeah, I think I've heard of that place. I'm sure it's on quite a few of like the ghost shows that I watch. Hotel Chelsea, Chelsea, New York City. Hotel Chelsea is legendary. It has served as a place to lay the head for just about every major eccentric in the city. It was even the home base for the Andy Warhol bohemian crowd in the 1960s for a while. From Jimi Hendrix to Janis Joplin and Bob Dylan, numerous famous faces have graced the halls of the Chelsea. With all these legends in one place, you're bound to have some bad behaviour or more than a couple of ugly encounters. Punk rock star Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen were staying in the hotel when Nancy was found dead from a gruesome stabbing. Sid died shortly after from a heroin overdose. Many think he overdosed out of guilt for Nancy's murder. After drinking himself to death at the White Horse Tavern, Dylan Thomas was returned to the Chelsea room 205 before dying in the hospital. Yes, we just learned about that earlier, didn't we? The Hotel Chelsea is also said to be haunted by the ghost of a Titanic survivor named Mary. After losing her husband in the tragedy, she hung herself from the 5th floor. Another wealthy socialite, an artist named Nadia, is said to have jumped from the balcony after failed marriage. Both of these women are reported to still wander the halls today. Yeah, I guess if you don't know who Sid Vicious is, he was in a really famous British punk rock band. They only did like one album back in like the 70s, I think it was the 70s maybe. No, I don't think it was the 80s, I think it was the 70s. Great band. But yeah, they weren't meant to be, I guess. But there was a show about it on Disney Plus that they brought out, and in that show they did portray that he probably killed her, but who knows. Buffalo Central Terminal. Buffalo Central Terminal was once a bustling hub of transit. Though the last train pulled out in 1979, the Art Deco station is reportedly still very busy. In fact, it's said to be one of the most haunted buildings in the state. Ghost hunters, photographers, and general tourists are drawn to the stunning structure. For different reasons, obviously. A woman named Rose is commonly seen near the baggage claim. Businessmen in period dress are seen scuffling along the platforms. And the ragged apparitions of homeless people who died from hypothermia in the abandoned building are also still hanging out in the terminal. And last but not least, we have Merchant's House Museum in East Village. The Merchant's House is not only a National Historic Landmark, but has also secured a spot on the National Register of Historic Places. The late federal-style home was built in 1832 by the Treadwell family, but it has been a museum for almost as long as it was a home. Gertrude Treadwell was born in the home in 1840, the youngest of 8 children, and she lived the entirety of her life on East 4th Street. Dying at 93 without an heir, Gertrude's home was turned over to the city, and it became a museum in 1936. The house qualified easily for historic status because Gertrude had famously kept everything in the home just as it was in 1840. From the Greek revival interior fittings to the furniture, she even kept collections of the family's personal belongings. Though the home technically no longer belongs to Gertrude, nobody told her that. Since the mid-1930s, guests to the home museum have reported hearing strange noises, smelling perfume and food products, hearing the piano play itself at night, and seeing inanimate objects moving on their own. The house museum is open for regular